Today I'm just an old man sitting in the shade, bones tired and a heart full of memories. But my mind remembers everything. And there's one thing I've never forgotten. The day they tore my brother away from me, Elias, he was my blood, my world. They promised we'd be reunited, that the colonel would look after us, but it was all a lie. Since then, I've carried this story inside me, waiting for the right time to tell it, and now, that time has come. If you hear this and it touches your heart, subscribe and help me keep my brother's memory alive. Maybe someone out there will remember. The oldest memory I have of my childhood is the smell of wet earth mixed with smoke. Elias and I used to run barefoot through the trees, dodging scoldings and laughing at everything. It was all grass, fruit picked straight from the tree, and freedom, no luxuries, no abundance, but we had each other. We slept together, shared everything, even our dreams. My brother was my hero, even if he was only 2 years older. He made up stories, pretended we were kings and soldiers, said we'd build a house one day where no one gave us orders. And I believed him. Oh, how I believed him. But it all ended in one day, like someone had wiped the world clean. I must have been around 6 when they came. I don't know where from, just that they came fast, armed, shouting commands. One of them stepped off his horse and looked at us like he was picking livestock. The adults tried to hide us, but it was useless. There were screams, beatings, people falling. All I could see was Elias grabbing my hand, pushing me behind the barrel, telling me to stay quiet. He was shaking, but he never let go of my hand. Not until they hit him in the head with a rifle, but that was the end of my childhood. They loaded us into a truck, people crying, children screaming, the floor shaking. No one knew where we were, going only that there was no going back on the road. One of the men said the colonel would take care of us, that we'd work and be fed, and that siblings would be reunited later. Elias looked at me and gave a weak smile, trying to calm me down, and I, foolish child, believed it. I thought everything would blow over soon, but soon kept getting farther away. When we reached the plantation, they split us up. No explanation, no goodbye. They just called out names and took Elias to the big house. I was left with the little ones, tossed into a dark corner of the shed. That first night without him was the worst of my life. I cried until I couldn't breathe. No one came. No one cared. I woke up the next day already hearing orders. They taught me to be silent, to keep my head down, to not ask questions. The world I knew died that night, turned to dust, and a new one began, a world where children were not children. We carried loads, got beaten, went without food. And if you cried, you got hit again. Some kids vanished overnight. They said they were sent to another plantation. They never came back. Every night, I curled into a corner, clinging to memories of my brother. I imagined him coming to get me, saying everything would be okay. Sometimes I dreamed of it and woke up smiling, but it was a lie. Reality was harsh, cold, and faceless. Missing him hurt more than hunger. Sometimes I thought I was forgetting his face, his voice. That terrified me, so I whispered his name every night, just so I wouldn't forget. Elias, Elias, Elias. It was all I had, a name lost in silence. I became a number a boy used to pull, push, and stay quiet. And even that young, I began to understand that life was designed to break us inside. I saw kids give up. I saw lifeless eyes. I saw a boy my age throw himself into a well to go back to his mother. But I couldn't give up. I had to stay, because the colonel promised. And even when everything said otherwise, part of me kept believing. Every week, I asked the overseer if he'd heard of Elias. He laughed said, kids need to work, not dream. But I dreamed. It was all I had. Dreams and faith. And that's what kept me standing. Childhood passed quickly, almost without me noticing. Before I knew it, I was too big to cry in secret, but too small to face the world. I got good at what I did, learned to obey, to hide my fear. But inside, I was all longing for a brother ripped away with no explanation, and for a promise still unfulfilled. And if I tell all this now, it's not for pity. It's so you know it happened, that there was a childhood stolen by force and a boy who spent his life trying to pick up the pieces. The day they tore us apart is burned into my memory like a brand on flesh. It was morning. The sun had barely risen, but the heat already clung to our skin. They lined us up like cattle, calling out names, pushing and pulling, deciding where each of us would be sent. I remember holding Elias's hand so tight that my knuckles turned white. We had survived the journey together, and I truly believed they would let us stay side by side. That promise echoed in my mind. You'll be together again. Soon, a lie I hadn't yet learned to question. The man with the clipboard shouted names, barely looking at us. When he called mine, I didn't move. I stood frozen, my hand still wrapped in Elias's. Another man grabbed my arm, yanked me away, and I screamed. I screamed loud and wild, like an animal caught in a trap. Elias lunged forward, fighting the hands that held him back. His voice cracked as he yelled my name over and over, but they hit him hard in the stomach, and he folded to the ground. That was the last time I touched him, the last time I saw his face. They dragged me to a small cart, tossing me in with other boys. I kicked and cried until my throat gave out, but nobody paid attention to them. It was just noise, just another child refusing to accept the new order. Through the wooden slats, I watched as they pulled Elias to the other side of the plantation. He didn't look back. I don't blame him. Maybe he couldn't. Maybe he was unconscious. Or maybe it hurt too much. I don't know. I'll never know. They took him to the main house. I heard whispers that the strongest boys were being kept close to the colonel for special work. What that meant, no one ever said, but I could see it in their faces, the older slaves, when they talked in hushed tones. It wasn't good. It never was. That night, I lay on the floor of the barn with straw poking my skin, surrounded by silence. I waited for Elias, every creak in the wood, every shadow passing by. I thought it was him, but it never was, and so began a stretch of days that blurred into years. I asked about him constantly, first with desperation, then with a hollow voice, and finally with silence. The overseer always shrugged. He's not your concern now. He said, you've got work to do. The other boys learned quickly to forget. It was the only way to survive. But I couldn't. I didn't want to. Forgetting Elias felt like letting him die. And I couldn't carry that on top of everything else. I learned to work like the others, to carry buckets too heavy for my size, to dig with blisters on my hands, to swallow tears before they fell. But inside, I stayed that little boy screaming at the top of his lungs, begging not to be taken away. The voice got quieter as I got older, but it never stopped. Some nights, I dreamed that Elias was right there beside me. He hadn't been taken. He was just asleep. And when I woke up, we'd be together again. But morning always came, and with it the truth. I was alone. The worst part wasn't the labor. It wasn't the pain or the hunger. It was the not knowing, the silence, not knowing if he was still alive, if he was close or far, if he remembered me or if he had been forced to forget. That kind of uncertainty eats you from the inside. It becomes a second kind of hunger, one that no bread can cure. One day, years later, I saw a boy who looked like him, Same eyes, same walk. For a moment, I thought it was real. My heart jumped so hard it hurt. I ran toward him, calling his name. But when he turned around, it wasn't Elias, just another stranger with a familiar face. I stood there, not knowing whether to cry or apologize. The boy looked at me like I was mad. Maybe I was. Maybe I still am. There were moments I hated the colonel more for the lie than the labor. I could endure the chains, the hunger, the sun carving into my back. But that promise, that cruel hope, was the thing that broke me, because it made me wait. It made me hope. It kept me looking for someone who might have been long gone. If they had just told me the truth, maybe I could have mourned. Maybe I could have moved on. But no, they said, "You'll be reunited soon," and left me in the dark for the rest of my life. And so I lived with the question, was he alive? Had he escaped? Did he grow old thinking of me too? I tried to imagine what he would look like with a beard, with gray hair, with the same tired eyes I see in the mirror now. But I can't. The only Elias I know is the boy with dirt on his cheeks and a fire in his eyes, screaming my name while they drag me away. Some days, I still wake up and expect to see him. My bones crack, my breath is short. But for a few seconds, I feel like a child again, and I forget. I forget that the world took him from me. And then I remember, and it feels like losing him all over again. That's the thing about separation, they tell you it's temporary. They say you reunite, but sometimes the distance is forever, and the pain, it doesn't fade. It just settles into your bones, quiet and constant, like a second heartbeat. The lie didn't come like a slap. It came soft, slow, and sweet like honey over poison. That's what made it so cruel, because I believed it, because I needed to. In a world where nothing belonged to me, not my name, not my time, not even my own body, that promise was the only thing I had. You'll be reunited soon. I repeated it in my head every night like a prayer. I didn't know yet that the man who said it, the colonel, could lie with a smile on his face and still sleep peacefully under his roof. The first time I saw him, I was still a child. He rode in on a white horse, dressed clean, smelling of tobacco and arrogance. The overseers lined us up as if we were tools, not people. He walked down the row, looking at each of us. When he passed by me, he stopped, bent down, lifted my chin, asked my name, like he cared. I was too scared to answer. The overseer whispered it for me. "This one's missing his brother." The man added. The colonel smiled soft, fake, and said, "Don't worry, son. We keep families close here." That was the moment. That was the lie. It sounded like mercy, like hope. And for a long time, it worked. I did everything I was told, worked harder than the others, thinking maybe they'd reward me by letting me see Elias. I imagined them watching me, deciding if I had earned the right to see my brother, like it was a prize, not a right. The colonel's words became a chain wrapped in silk, invisible, but heavy. Other boys laughed at me, said I was stupid for believing it. He says that to everyone. They told me, "He don't even know your name." But I clung to those words. When your world is built on pain, you'll drink hope even if it's poison. I was just a boy, trying to survive. I remember once, maybe a year after our separation, the colonel walked past while we were hauling sacks to the storage house. I stood up straighter, tried to meet his eye, thinking maybe he'd remember me. Maybe he'd say something. But he didn't even look in my direction, just passed by, laughing with one of his sons about the weather or the price of sugar. That's when I felt something crack inside me, a silence louder than any scream. Later, I asked one of the older men if the colonel ever meant what he said. The man spit on the ground and shook his head. He says what he needs to keep us quiet. He muttered, "A lie is cheaper than a whip." I didn't understand it fully then, but the words stayed with me. A lie is cheaper than a whip. It's how they kept us hoping, waiting, behaving. Why beat us down when you can make us wait for something that will never come? Years passed. Every season bled into the next, and I watched other boys grow bitter. Some tried to escape. Some went silent. I kept asking. Once every few months, I'd find the courage to speak to a guard or an overseer, asking if anyone had seen Elias. Most ignored me. A few laughed. One once told me, "You think he still remembers you?" That cut deeper than any lash. I tried to imagine what would happen if Elias came back, what I would say, if I would even recognize him. I wondered if he had changed, if the world had hardened him, or worse, if the lie had broken him too. But I never stopped picturing it. The colonel's voice echoed in my head, even after I knew it was false. "You'll be reunited soon." It became like a ghost, haunting every corner of my mind. What hurt most wasn't that he lied. It was that he did it so easily, as if it cost him nothing, as if our pain was nothing but destiny. His path. That man ate well, slept warm, rode horses for pleasure, while we were down in the dirt breaking our bodies for his profit. And yet he still found the time to light to look a scared child in the eye and feed him false comfort. That is a special kind of cruelty, not the violence you see, but the kindness that's fake, the hope that's empty. And the worst part, I still wanted it to be true, even when I knew better. Some part of me held onto it, not because I believed in him, but because I believed in Elias. I believed that maybe, just maybe, my brother was out there believing too. Maybe he remembered the same lie. Maybe he was waiting on his side of the plantation, thinking I was coming to children, both waiting for the same lie to become real. As I grew older, I stopped asking, not because I stopped caring, but because the answers never changed. Silence, shrugs, smirks. The lie had run its course. It had done its job. It had kept me in place long enough to forget how to run. That's what it was meant to do. Looking back now, I don't think the colonel remembered me at all. To him, I was just another pair of hands, another back to bend, another voice to silence. He probably forgot my face the moment he walked away, but I never forgot his, not because of what he did, but because of what he said. Because those words, those cheap, hollow words shaped my life more than any whip ever did. They say wounds heal, but lies become the air you breathe, and if you're not careful, you start to build your whole life around them. That's what he did to me. He didn't just steal my brother, he stole my reason to hope, and left me with nothing but silence and shadows. There's a rhythm to suffering, a beat you fall into, like footsteps in dry soil. That's what the fields taught me, not all at once, but slowly, like water carving stone. Day after day, year after year, the pain stops being sharp. It becomes background noise, and before you know it, you forget there was ever a time you didn't hurt. That's how I lived. That's how I survived. They woke us before the sun, every morning without fail. The horn would blow once, just once, and if you weren't on your feet by the time the second one came, you'd feel the stick on your back. Not a whip, not at first, just a long wooden pole. Later, they brought out worse. But in those early years, fear was enough to make our legs move, even when they were swollen, even when they bled. The field stretched farther than I could see, rows of cane as high as a grown man's shoulders. We were made to carry tools too heavy for our arms, to swing them until our muscles failed, and then swing them more, The overseers called it building strength. I called it breaking children. But I didn't speak those words out loud. None of us did at first. My hands blistered so bad I couldn't hold the blade. I remember hiding my palms at night, pressing them into my sides so no one would see. We weren't allowed to rest, not even when the sun was directly overhead. They said shade was for the masters. We were the shade. We were the ground. We were nothing. Every now and then, someone would collapse, fall straight to the dirt, mouth open, eyes empty. They didn't always get up. Sometimes they were dragged to the side and left until the end of the day. Sometimes they didn't wake. When that happened, no one said anything. We just kept swinging. I learned to stop counting the hours. They didn't belong to me. I moved by instant cut, lift, carry, drop. My body grew stronger, but not in a way that felt human. I wasn't growing. I was hardening, like iron and fire. And every blow of the sun, every crack of the stick, every shouted command shaped me into something I didn't recognize. I looked in puddles sometimes and saw a stranger, a boy with hollow eyes and a tight jaw, a boy who didn't laugh anymore, not even in dreams. There was no music in the field, only noise, birds overhead, the swish of blades through stalks, the thud of feet on dirt, and the voices those never stopped. Orders bark, threats hiss, insults thrown like stones. We learned to ignore them. The way you ignore a headache. They became part of the world, like heat and hunger. Food came in metal pots, dumped into wooden bowls. Usually a mash of beans and hard grain, sometimes not enough, always cold. We ate fast, heads down, eyes on the ground. Talking was discouraged. Laughter was punished. Once, a boy next to me made a joke under his breath. A guard heard it and dragged him away by the ear. He didn't come back that night. No one asked where he went. That was the rule. Don't ask. Don't look. Sleep was the only escape, and even that wasn't safe. The shed we slept in stank of sweat and mildew. We lay on straw or bare boards, bodies packed tight. Rats sometimes ran over our feet. Mosquitoes feasted on our skin, and still, it was better than being awake, better than feeling. In sleep, I could see lies. I could pretend we were running through trees again, laughing, free. But the dreams always ended the same, his hand slipping from mine, his voice fading. The older I got, the quieter I became. There were boys who screamed in protest, who fought back. They didn't last long. I stayed silent. I watched. I obeyed. But inside me, something burned, a small flame, hidden deep. I kept Elias's name there, in that fire, whispered it each night before closing my eyes. Just one word, to remind myself I was more than a body, that I had been a brother once, that I was still a soul. Time moved strangely in the field. Some seasons came with storms. The rain made the dirt into thick mud that sucked at our feet and stole our strength. Other times, the sun was so brutal it cracked the ground like broken skin. But the work never changed. Rain or shine, pain or health, we cut, we carried, we obeyed. Once, I saw a guard drop his baton, a moment of clumsiness. He cursed, bent to pick it up, and I thought, for just a second, about grabbing it, about swinging it at him with all the strength I had. But then I thought of Elias, of what he would want, of what it would cost, so I kept my hands to myself. That's what survival looked like, swallowing every scream, every spark of rebellion, waiting, always waiting. Some boys stopped speaking altogether. Their minds broke before their bodies. They'd stare at nothing, work without reacting. I feared that fate more than death, because it meant losing yourself. I held on to every scrap of memory. I had our mother's voice, Elias's laugh, the stars above the village. I kept them locked inside, like sacred relics. My field was not just cane. It was a graveyard of forgotten lives. I refused to bury mine. The days in the field made me old before my time. They stole the color from my thoughts and the strength from my dreams. But they didn't take everything. Not yet. Because every morning, even after all those years, I still listened for a voice that never came. Still hoped for a glimpse of a face I hadn't seen since I was a boy. Elias was the name I worked for, the name I suffered for, the name that kept me human. If this memory touched you, help keep it alive, subscribe to the channel, and if you can, leave your thoughts or share this story with someone who needs to hear it. Thank you. They say hope is a dangerous thing. I believe that. But it's also the only thing I had that wasn't stolen from me. It didn't come from the colonel, or the overseers, or the lies. It came from somewhere deeper, somewhere they couldn't reach. No matter how many times they tried to beat it out of me, I didn't even know it was hope. Not at first. I just called it waiting, or remembering. But now, looking back, I see it for what it was, a flame, small, quiet, but always burning. It lived in the way I whispered my brother's name at night, in the way I glanced at every new face, searching for his, in the way I never let myself believe he was gone for good. I told myself stories in the dark, not fairy tales, no princes or magic, just simple things. I imagined Elias had been sent to a far-off place, that he was learning, growing stronger, that one day he'd come back for me, and when he did, we'd run, we'd disappear into the forest and never look back. I didn't tell these stories to anyone, just myself, and that was enough. Others mocked me, said hope was for fools, said the sooner you kill it, the easier the pain gets. Maybe they were right, but I couldn't kill it. It was all I had. When your body is shackled, your spirit needs something to hold on to. And mine held on to the idea of him, of Elias, alive, free, looking for me too. There were moments it nearly died, days when the heat pressed down like a weight, when my legs gave out, when I bled into the soil and thought, maybe this is it. Maybe this is how I end, nameless, faceless, forgotten. But even then, the flame flickered, weak, but not gone. That flicker kept me breathing. One night, during the rains, I found a piece of charcoal in the ashes of the cooking fire. Everyone else was asleep, snoring, groaning in their dreams. I took that charcoal and scratched Elias's name into the wall of the shed. Just 5 letters. Crooked and faint, but seeing it there, made by my own hand, it felt like shouting into the dark. He lived. He mattered. I remember. From then on, I did it whenever I could. I wrote his name in hidden places under floorboards, on the backs of wooden posts, behind loose bricks, not for anyone else to see, just me. It became a ritual, a way of saying, I'm still here. And so is he. It made me feel less alone. There was an old man who worked near the edge of the fields. He'd been there longer than anyone. Bones bent, eyes pale, voice soft. One day, I asked him if hope ever helped, if it ever led to freedom. He looked at me for a long time and said, hope doesn't set you free, but it keeps you alive long enough to find a way. I never forgot that. Some nights, when the moon was full, I'd sneak out of the shed just to feel the wind, just to remind myself that the world outside the field still existed. The stars were the same ones we used to look at back home. That comforted me. Even if everything else had changed, the sky hadn't. I'd sit there, silent, thinking about Elias, wondering if he was looking at the same stars. Maybe he was. Maybe he was doing the same thing. Once, I found a bird with a broken wing near the fence line. It was trembling, scared, dragging itself in the dirt. I cupped it in my hands and held it close. Didn't speak, didn't move, just sat with it until the sun came up. Then I let it go. It couldn't fly, but it could still move. I thought to myself, that's me, broken, but not finished. As I got older, I started to notice small cracks in the system. Guards who looked away for a second too long, gaps in the routines, forgotten keys, words whispered between workers, signs, possibilities. I didn't act on any of them, not yet, but I stored them in my mind because hope was evolving. It wasn't just memory anymore. It was planning, watching, waiting, becoming something sharper, something dangerous. The colonel still walked the ground sometimes. I'd see him from a distance, fatter, older, slower, but still with that same smug smile. I wondered if he remembered me, if he ever thought about the promises he made to a scared little boy. Probably not, but I remembered. That's what mattered. I remembered everything. Hope made me dangerous, not to them, but to despair. It kept me from sinking into that deep hole so many others fell into. I saw their eyes, empty, gone. They had nothing left. I didn't want to end up like that. I couldn't, not while Elias's name still echoed in my head, not while the flame still burned. There was a girl once, maybe 13, who arrived from another plantation. She was scared, shaking, eyes darting like a bird in a trap. I sat near her one night, said nothing, just let her cry. After a while, I whispered, "Don't let them take your name. Don't forget who you are." She nodded, didn't speak, but I saw the flicker return in her face, just a flicker. But that's all it takes. Hope spreads, quietly, like fire under ash, and sometimes that's enough to change everything. So I held on. I held on to Elias, to my name, to the stars, to every scratch on the wall. I held on because I had to, because without that flame, there was nothing left. It didn't start with a plan. It started with a look, a glance exchanged between the tired souls who had lost everything except their will. We didn't speak at first, just watched, listened, waited. Escape wasn't something you shouted about, it was something you whispered into the dark, so low the trees had to lean in to hear you. I remember the first time I truly heard it. It was during the harvest, hot, unbearable, and endless. A boy named Josiah, tall, quiet, eyes always scanning the tree line, leaned close to me as we loaded bundles into the cart. They say the river runs fast after the rain, he murmured, just that, a sentence, out of place, strange. But I understood, not with my head, but with something deeper, a message, disguised as nothing. From that day on, I started to hear more of them, little phrases, pieces of something bigger. The moon will be full soon. The dog near the east fence don't bark at strangers. The guard with the limp sleeps heavy. None of it meant anything by itself, but together. It was a map, a song of survival passed between broken mouths. Not everyone believed. Some said escape was suicide. Others had tried before, and we never saw them again. Maybe they made it. Maybe they were caught and buried somewhere without a name. The risk was real. The punishments even more so. One boy, no older than 14, was caught near the fence with a piece of rope hidden in his shirt. They made us all watch as they lashed him bloody and threw him back into the field, half dead. After that, even whispers became rarer, but they didn't stop, not entirely, because there's a point where fear and pain stop working. When they've taken everything from you, there's nothing left to lose but your chains. That's when the idea becomes too loud to ignore. I kept my ears open. I started remembering paths. Which guards patrolled which routes, which doors creak, which ones didn't. I memorized the schedule down to the minute. When they ate, when they walked, when they slept. I turned myself into a shadow, silent and unseen. Not for escape, not yet, but to prepare. Because even if I didn't act on it, I needed to believe that I could. There was a woman named Ruth who worked in the kitchens, older than most, skin tough like leather, eyes sharp. She had a scar across her cheek and never spoke unless necessary. But one night, when I brought in the firewood, she slid a piece of cloth into my pocket. I didn't check it until I was back in the shed. It was a torn corner of a map, just to sketch some trees, a river, a path, no names, no compass, but I knew what it meant. She had seen me. She had judged me ready. I didn't sleep that night. I lay there with my heart in my throat, staring into the dark. The idea had become a shape, and that shape had teeth. It terrified me. Not because of death I'd made peace with that long ago, but because of what it meant. That I might actually have a choice, a way out. The thought of freedom, after so many years of chains, was almost too big to carry. We started talking in code. Me, Josiah, Ruth, and a few others, only when no one was near, only in fragments. We never said escape. We never said run. We spoke of visits, of walking past a river, of seeing the sky from the other side. Words that meant nothing to the guards. It wasn't easy. Trust is dangerous in places like that. One wrong whisper, one curious glance, and you could disappear. So we moved slow, careful. I remember the sound of my own breath becoming louder. Then the words I spoke. I remember how my fingers trembled even when my voice stayed calm. The plan was always shifting. Routes changed. People got moved. One of us, a boy named Eli, not my brother, a different one, was reassigned to the stables. We lost contact with him after that. We never knew if he'd been caught or if he was just waiting. That uncertainty ate at us, but we couldn't afford. Grief was loud. Hope had to be quiet. I began to dream of the trees again, of the ones near my village, tall and green and full of wind. I imagined them calling to me, not just offering shade, but shelter, a promise. I hadn't felt that in so long. I didn't believe in signs anymore. But when the crow landed on the fence one morning and stared straight at me, I nodded back, as if it understood, as if we both knew something was coming. What gave us the most courage wasn't the plan or the map, it was the thought that someone, somewhere, had made it, that maybe Elias had run, that maybe he was out there, living, under his own name, free. That idea kept my feet moving, not toward the field, but toward possibility. The guards noticed, eventually, not what we were saying but the silence. They knew the signs, and they cracked down hard. More inspections, more punishments, more shouting. One night, they stormed into our shed and dragged a girl out by her hair. No reason, just fear. The next morning, she was back, quiet, different, her fire dimmed. It made us pause, made us question everything. But we didn't stop. The flame of hope had grown too large to smother. Too many of us had breathed. Too many of us had seen the cracks in the wall and realized they weren't just breaks, they were doors. Escape was no longer a dream. It was an echo growing louder in our ears. And I knew then, the time would come. Sooner or later, we would move. Whether we made it or not, we would try. Because the only thing more dangerous than running was staying. That night, the air was thick with tension, like the calm before a storm that refuses to break. We had whispered, planned, and waited for months, but nothing could have prepared me for the moment when the time finally came. The moon was hidden behind heavy clouds, a cloak of darkness blessing our escape. Every sound was louder, every shadow sharper. Fear and hope tangled inside my chest. Pushing and pulling like wild horses, we gathered at the edge of the field. Eyes wide and hearts hammering, Ruth stood silent, her face unreadable, but I saw the fire in her eyes, the same fire I had felt growing inside me for years. Josiah handed out scraps of bread quietly, like passing out pieces of a secret. I clutched my small bundle tightly, the rough cloth rubbing against my skin, and thought of Elias. If he was out there somewhere, I was running for him, for us. The guards' patrols had changed, but not enough. We timed their footsteps, their breaths, their pauses. Every crack of a twig sounded like a shout. The cartwheels groaned in the distance. We froze, barely daring to breathe. One wrong move, and it was over. But no one moved. The night held us still. A fragile pause before everything broke loose. I felt the rough bark of the fence beneath my fingertips as I slipped through a loose board Ruth had found days before. The cold bit into my skin, but I didn't care. Freedom was just on the other side. I looked back once. The field stretched endlessly behind me, a sea of cane swaying like ghosts. My friends followed silently, shadows slipping through shadows. We moved fast, feet barely touching the ground. Every step was a prayer, every breath a promise. The forest ahead whispered secrets in the wind, the trees bending slightly as if welcoming us home. But the fear was always there, sharp as a blade. If they caught us, it meant chains, punishment, maybe death. My legs burned, lungs screaming for air I couldn't fully take in. But I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. Hope was a fire now, a wildfire, tearing through the years of pain and silence. I was running not just for myself, but for every name they had tried to erase. For Elias. At one point, the sharp crack of a branch snapped behind us. A guard. He was running, shouting, but we were faster. Ruth's voice barely reached me. Keep moving, don't look back. I swallowed my terror and pushed harder, muscles screaming, heart pounding like a war drum. We crossed the river just as the water roared over rocks, cold and wild. The current clawed at my legs, but it carried us forward, away from the plantation, away from chains. For a moment, I dared to believe we were free. But freedom wasn't just a place. It was a battle, a test. The forest was dark, full of unseen dangers. We navigated by memory and whispers, stepping carefully over roots and through thorns that tore our skin. Hunger gnawed at us. Exhaustion pulled us down. But the flame of hope kept us moving. Hours passed like days. Every shadow was a threat, every sound a warning. I thought of Elias, if he had run before me. If he was hiding in this same forest, maybe he was watching for me too, praying for my footsteps. When dawn finally broke, we were lost, exhausted, but alive. We collapsed in the small clearing. The sun's first light a cruel reminder that freedom was still a journey, not a destination. But in that moment, with the sky stretching endlessly above us, I felt something I hadn't felt in years, a chance, a future. We were not just running from the past, we were running toward something real, toward a life we could claim, toward each other. And that night was the beginning. We thought freedom would be a clear line when you crossed and never looked back. But it wasn't. Freedom didn't come like a sunrise. It came in fragments, in whispers. In the quiet space between running and hiding, we were out, yes, but we were far from safe. Every sound still made our bodies flinch. Every branch snapping in the woods felt like a whip cracking behind us. We moved like hunted animals, always watching, always listening. There were 7 of us now. One had turned back the second night, said he couldn't do it, couldn't sleep. In the cold, couldn't walk another step. Ruth begged him to stay, but he slipped away before morning. We never saw him again. Maybe he made it back, maybe he didn't. But the rest of us pressed forward, step after painful step. Our feet bled. Our clothes were torn. Food was scarce, mostly roots, berries, whatever we could snatch without slowing down. The forest had no mercy, but it had something the plantation never offered: choice. We chose each step. We chose to endure. That made all the difference. Josiah found a stream one morning, cold and clear. We drank like wild things, then bathed, washing off years of dust and chains. I remember looking at my reflection and hardly recognizing the man staring back, thinner, sharper. But there was something else in my eyes now, something I hadn't seen in years. Not just hope, determination. That fire Ruth carried, I saw it in myself, and I knew then we couldn't stop. Not now. Not when we had come so far. Still, the fear stayed with us. We spoke less with words and more with glances. A single look was enough to say, move. Another meant, hide. Every night, we rotated watches, one of us staying awake while the others slept in shifts. I remember watching Ruth one night, the moon casting silver over her face. Her eyes were open, but not seeing. She was somewhere else, lost in memory, or maybe planning the road ahead. She never talked about her past, not even once. But in that silence, I felt closer to her than to anyone. We were stitched together by the same wound. One day we reached a road, a real one wide, packed with wagon tracks and blueprints. We all stared at it like it was a river of fire. It was dangerous, too open, too exposed. But Ruth pointed west, toward a ridge, and said, we had to cross it, no other way forward. We waited until nightfall, hearts pounding, then moved fast. Every step felt like a scream. I thought I heard riders behind us more than once, but it was always just wind through the trees. We reached the other side breathless, shaking, but untouched. The ridge gave way to farmland abandoned, wild with weeds. We found shelter in an old shed, collapsed in a heap. That night, we ate wild pears from a fallen tree, sweet, overripe. They made our stomachs twist, but we didn't care. It was food, and it was ours. That night, Josiah pulled something from his pocket, a scrap of cloth, wrapped tight. Inside was a button, shiny, clean, not from anything we had worn. He said he'd found it near the stream, where we had washed. Someone else came through, he whispered. Someone else made it this far. We passed it around like it was gold, a sign. Proof we weren't alone, that others had done this. Maybe Elias had done this. Maybe that button had been his. It was foolish, I know. But in that moment, we believed it. We needed to. We stayed in that shed for days, resting, planning, arguing. Some wanted to push west. Others said north, toward rumored safe houses. Ruth listened to us all, then said, we move toward people, but we don't ask. We watch, we wait, and if we see kindness, we show our face. That was the plan. Careful, silent, we left the shed just before dawn, moving through tall grass. That day we saw a house in the distance, smoke from the chimney, chickens in the yard, a boy, maybe 10, feeding them. He didn't see us. We crouched and watched for hours, trying to read the wind. Was it safe? Could we risk it? In the end, we walked away. To many unknowns, we couldn't afford kindness if it turned to betrayal. Every step further from the plantation felt like a new world unfolding, but also like a new danger waiting. We began marking trees, leaving signs for others, scratches, twine, symbols only we would recognize, like a trail of breadcrumbs for those behind us. I thought of Elias every time I carved a mark. What if he was out there, reading these signs, following them? What if we were walking the same road, only a few days apart, That thought kept me going, even when my legs gave out, even when Josiah twisted his ankle and we had to carry him half the day, even when Ruth collapsed from fever and we sat in silence, thinking we might lose her. But she pulled through. She always did, stronger than all of us. And we knew we couldn't stop. Freedom wasn't a place. It was a direction. A breath you fight to keep, a dream that demands your scars. And we were still walking, still choosing, still alive. The day we found each other again was quieter than I ever imagined it would be. No trumpet calls, no cheers, just a broken soul standing beneath the same old tree where we had played as boys before the world shattered. Elias, my brother, the man who had lived in my heart through every hardship, every fear, every night alone in the dark. He was real. He was here. We didn't speak at first. Words felt too small, too fragile for what we carried inside. I looked into his eyes, and I saw the same storm I felt raging in my chest, a mix of relief, pain, and something deeper, the memory of who we were before the chains. The boy who had been stolen from me, the boy who had survived. He told me stories of his own escape, the dangers he faced, the people who helped him, the nights he thought he'd never see freedom. I shared my own scars, the names I had carved into walls, the friendships forced in silence, the hope that kept me alive. We were the halves of a story too cruel for words. Our reunion was not a fairy tale. There were no promises of peace or easy days. The world outside the plantation was full of shadows, prejudice, fear, and the long fight to reclaim dignity. But we had each other, and that was the first true freedom. Together, we started to build a life from the ashes of our past. We found a small community of others who had escaped or been freed. We worked the land with hands that once knew only chains. We told our stories aloud, passing them to the next generation, so they would never forget what was stolen and what was fought for. I learned that memory is not just pain, it is power. It is the flame that lights the way for those who come after us. Without it, we are lost. With it, we become unbreakable. Elias and I vowed to carry that flame, to speak the names that history tried to erase, and to honor the lives that built the world we walk today. As I tell you this, I ask you to remember with me, not just my story, but all the stories that should never be forgotten. These memories are not just echoes from the past. They are warnings, lessons, and calls to action. They remind us why freedom must be protected, why dignity must be fought for, and why we must never be silent. If this story moved you, please show your support. Hit the like button to honor every voice lost and found. Share your thoughts in the comments. Your reflections help keep this history alive and growing. And if you know someone who needs to hear this, share it with them. Together, we can preserve these memories for generations to come. And if you want to hear more, to feel the strength and pain of others who lived through shadows and fought for light, check out the other stories on our channel. The playlist is carefully gathered to keep this history alive and connect us all. You'll find the link in the description below or pinned in the comments. Every story matters. Every voice deserves to be heard. Thank you for listening. Thank you for remembering.